Hello friends, let's do the essay of Death by Francis Bacon. It is a short essay, but it is full of Latinisms. That is, as you know, a very prominent feature of Francis Bacon's essays. He sprinkles his essays with a lot of Latin phrases and quotations and names. So let's begin reading the essay. Men fear death as children fear to go in the dark, and as the natural fear in children. And as that natural fear in children is increased with tales, so is the other. So he opens with this statement: men fear death like children fear darkness. And the natural fear, children have this natural fear for darkness, and that is made worse by all kind of stories, ghost stories. I guess all of us have that experience. When we are little, we like listening to ghost stories and stories of magic, and we like watching horror movies, and then we become all the more scared. So same is the case with men. Men generally have a fear of death, and this fear of death becomes worse when they listen to all kind of stories related to death. So that's why this natural fear, it is increased with tales. Certainly the contemplation of death as the wages of sin and passage to another world is holy and religious, but the fear of it as a tribute due unto nature is weak. So he says, thinking of death or considering death, contemplation, thinking of death as the wages of sin, that is looking at death as a punishment for a sin that you have committed, and looking at death as a means of passing over to the other world, looking at death as either of these, either as wages of sin or as a passage to another world, is holy and religious. But if you start being afraid of death, as we know that death is a part of nature, and if you are worried about death occurring to you as part of nature, then that means you are a weak person, because we should be able to accept death as something that would ultimately happen to all of us. So that is why he says it is weak. Yet in religious meditations there is sometimes mixture of vanity and of superstition. You shall read in some of the friars' books of mortification that a man should think with himself what the pain is if he have but his fingers' end pressed or tortured, and thereby imagine what the pains of death are when the whole body is corrupted and dissolved. When many times death passeth with less pain than the torture of a limb, for the most vital parts are not the quickest of sense. So he says that in religious meditations, when religious books, when priests and friars, when they talk about death, sometimes he says there is a mixture of vanity and superstition. Because you would read in books of friars about mortification. Mortification is self-mortification, because we have read about some ascetics or some monks who punish themselves, who hit themselves, who burn their bodies, who cover themselves with ashes, who don't eat any food, who starve themselves, and they do all this in an attempt to to find God. And so he says that, and why do they do this? So that they would know again what the pains of death are. So they say that all these experiences they go through so that they would understand what death would be like when it comes. But he says, and what would happen with death? Your whole body is corrupted and dissolved. So all these mortifications that they inflict on themselves is supposed to be a kind of a training, or it's supposed to give them the experience of death when it comes. But then he says, in truth or in real life, often death is painless. You don't have to go through such torture in order to anticipate death and to know what the experience is, because oftentimes death passeth with less pain than the torture of a limb. So death is more painless than torturing a part of your body. For the most vital parts are not the quickest of sense. So he says the vital parts, like for example the heart, the brain, such things are the vital parts. So these are not the quickest of sense, that is, they are slow in sensing pain. So sometimes death comes to you so quickly that you don't even realize the pain. You just die in a split second. So there is no point in reading about and getting worried about all these tales of mortification that people tell us about. And by him that spake only as a philosopher and natural man, it was well said, groans and convulsions and a discolored face and friends weeping and blacks and obsequies and the like show death terrible. So there was a philosopher, it seems, who said that actually death is not frightening, but it is the paraphernalia, all the accompaniments of death that make it more frightening than it really is. Groans, convulsions, that is, a dying man makes a lot of noises and he convulsions, his body keeps contracting and his face becomes discolored or pale. You have friends weeping all around him. Black here is the clothes that people wear in mourning. In European countries, you know that black is the color of mourning. And obsequies means all the respects that people pay and the talks that are accompanied with death. All these things together show that death is something terrible. In truth, death is not actually so frightening. It is worthy the observing that there is no passion in the mind of man so weak, but it mates and masters fear of death. So he says it's worth observing. That is, if you're too scared of death, just think of this this point that I am going to tell you, says Bacon, that there is no passion of the man of mind so weak, but it mates and masters the fear of death. That even the weakest passion in man's mind sometimes masters death. That is, people die for such silly reasons. So there are people who die for love, there are people who die for hate, there are people who die for honor. So all these human feelings, they oftentimes master death. So and therefore death is no such terrible enemy when a man had so many attendants about him that can win the combat of him. So death is not a real enemy. There are so many other things that can create worse trouble. For example, he says revenge triumphs over death. Some people, they are even ready to die in order to take revenge over somebody else. So revenge triumphs over death. Love slights it. Again, we have heard of lovers who kill themselves because they cannot live together, or maybe because one lover left the other one, jilted the other one. So people, love, according to Bacon, is a very weak passion. In his essay on love, he says that love is one of the weakest passions of human beings. And here he says that love is strong. He shows us how sometimes even love can be stronger than death, because people are there who die for the sake of love. Honor aspireth to it. Sometimes people die to safeguard their honor. Grief flieth to it. Sometimes people die because of grief. When you're too worried about something, you commit suicide and you kill yourself. Fear preoccupateth it. That is, sometimes people die of fear. They're frightened about something, they don't have the courage to face something, and so they kill themselves. Nay, we read, after Otho the emperor had slain himself, pity provoked many to die, out of mere compassion to their sovereign, and as the truest sort of followers. Then he says, in some cases, pity kills people. Like, for example, when Otho the emperor, Otho was the emperor of Rome for a very short period, for some few months, and Otho, for some good purpose, he decided to kill himself. And when he killed himself, it is said that some soldiers too killed themselves out of pity for Otho. And so he is trying to tell us that death is not something that is to be feared. Like the way we fear it, there is no need, because many human passions are more dangerous than death. Nay, Seneca adds niceness and satiety. So he says, yes, there are more things that can be added to this list. Seneca says that sometimes people die because of niceness and satiety, because they have too much of everything. When even niceness and satiety is when you are cloyed. Now suppose you get something good to eat. You eat it too much and then you get cloyed, or you're satiated. You don't want anything more. You can't even eat. Next time when somebody gives you this thing, you don't want even a piece of it. So that kind of feeling. So some people kill themselves because they are kind of their life is too easy and they're satiated with life. They have nothing more to do, and so they kill themselves. And a man would die, though he were neither valiant nor miserable, only upon a weariness to do the same thing so oft over and over. There are people who kill themselves out of boredom. It's not just valiant people who kill themselves, it's not just miserable people who kill themselves, but just because of weariness of doing the same thing. We talk about depression and such things where you just lose interest in life because you keep doing the same thing over and over. That's why our counselors and psychiatrists say that we shouldn't allow our work to pressure us too much. We should take a break once in a while, go on a vacation, because when you keep repeating the same thing over and over again, the boredom or the meaninglessness of what you're doing might lead you to killing yourself. So that is another reason. It is no less worthy to observe how little alteration in good spirits the approaches of death make, for they appear to be the same men till the last instant. So he says that in many cases, even when people know that he gives us some examples, when people know that death is approaching, they will be able to face it very lightly till the last instant. So they will not be worried. Some people get too worried about death, but there are many people who don't allow any alteration in their good spirits, who continue to be happy and strong even if they know that they are going to die till the last instant. And he gives us some examples. Augustus Caesar died in a compliment. Livia, remember the happy times together. So that is the translation of this. Now Augustus Caesar, he knew that he was going to die towards the end of his life. It seems he was when he died, just before dying, he told his wife Livia, Livia, please keep safe the memories of our life together, of our married life. We had a wonderful life together. Please remember it even after I'm gone. Those were the last words of Augustus Caesar. Then Tiberius again is another Roman emperor, and he too says that even at the last moment of his life, he in dissimulation is when you pretend, when you keep up appearances. So till the last moment of his life, he continued to pretend, or he tried to put up a very pleasant and a brave face. Then Vespasian, in a jest, sitting upon the stool, said that I am God now. So that is another one. Vespasian is another person who said, when he was almost nearing death, he was sitting upon a stool and he said, I am God now. I feel like God. Then again, when Galba, another emperor, was facing death, he was going to be put to death, and he showed his neck and said, yes, please get it done, I am ready to die. And now that is, he showed his neck to the people who were going to cut it. Septimius Severus in Dispatch. So Septimius Severus again said that he is ready to die, and quickly, if you want anything to be done, please tell me quickly, for I am going to die. So he again, in the last moment too, he was ready to face death and the like. So all these people are examples of men who faced death very stoically. Certainly the Stoics bestowed too much cost upon death, and by their great preparations made it appear more fearful. Better, saith he, it is as natural to die as to be born, and to a little infant perhaps the one is as painful as the other. So he says that Stoics sometimes make death seem to be a big affair, but let me take the words of another philosopher who made the whole thing very simple. He said it is as natural to die as to be born. Just as birth is natural, death is natural too. And for the newborn child, for a child who is going through the process of birth, it might be painful. Maybe that's why the child is crying, God knows. So then for the child, the process of birth, being pushed out through a very narrow passage, being evicted from a very comfortable zone, that might be a very painful experience. So birth is as painful as death. So just think of death that way. It is something as natural as birth. He that dies in an earnest pursuit is like one that is wounded in hot blood, who for the time scarce feels the hurt. And therefore a mind fixed and bent upon somewhat that is good, doth avert the dolours of death. So he says, when a person is killed, when he's doing something, he doesn't even realize the pain of death. Suppose you are doing something, you have heard about actors who die on the stage, or drivers who die when they are driving a bus. All this happens. Or a player who dies when he is playing. So when a person is engaged in an earnest pursuit of something, and at that time when death comes, he scarcely feels the pain. So therefore he says, the best thing is for our minds, always keep your minds occupied. Instead of worrying about the dolours of death, about the pains of death, the best thing is to keep your mind focused on something else, something that is good. Find something worthwhile to do with your life so that you don't have to worry about death. Death will come anyway. So let's not await death, wait for it and create trouble. Let it come when it comes. So a mind fixed and bent upon somewhat that is good, doth avert or prevent the worries of death. But above all, believe it. The sweetest canticle is Nunc dimittis, when a man hath obtained worthy ends and expectations. So he says the best thing is for you to be happy to face death, to accept death when it comes. Now here Nunc dimittis, this is a reference to a canticle. A canticle means hymn, and here the reference is to the song of Simeon in the Bible. Simeon was a Jew, and God had promised him that he will be able to see the Messiah before his death. And so when Christ, the infant Christ, was born, somewhere after some 40 days of his birth, he was taken to the temple of Jerusalem, and there it is said that Simeon, the Jew, took the baby Jesus in his hands. He realized that this is the Messiah born as to save the world, and he took the baby in his hands and he said to God, now I am ready to depart, because you have fulfilled the word that you gave me. You told me, you promised me that I would see the Messiah. I have seen him now, so you can take me now. So that is Nunc dimittis. So that would be the best thing, to accept death when it comes. And then he says there is one more good thing about death. Death hath this also, that it openeth the gate to good fame and extinguisheth envy. So death, when people die for noble causes, they will remain famous forever, because the world always remembers men who died for great things. So that is why he says death opens the gate to good fame. You sacrifice your life for some worthwhile cause, you are remembered and revered forever. And same way, death extinguisheth envy. Death removes envy, because nobody would be envious, nobody would be jealous of a dead man. So even your enemies will stop envying you once death comes upon you. So death in many ways is a kind of relief from the difficulties of life. So he makes a very impartial, Francis Bacon takes a very impartial view on death, and he looks at the pros and cons, and on the whole he seems to be favor death. And he tries to comfort us, saying that we really don't have to worry so much about death. Let us just take it as something as natural as birth, and let us accept death wholeheartedly when it comes. So that is the essay of death.